a new study out there claims that it paid viewers of Fox News to watch CNN for a month to see what would happen. Now, the results were actually kind of shocking and very, very interesting. So now, before I get into the study, I just want to give you some context here. And to note that on the show, I think that the biggest problem here in this country is American conservative media, the current conservative media atmosphere. And look, not the fact that, and let me be very, very clear on this, right? It's totally fine to be a conservative, right? To have conservative opinions, to have conservative opinion shows, all that stuff. I'm totally fine with that. I'm fine with that. I'm fine with policy disagreements. In fact, I think we should actually talk about policy, right? Now, the problem is, unfortunately, U.S. conservative media, dominated by Fox News, and what they do is create a completely alternative reality. Not a difference of opinion, but a completely different media bubble reality. And so now, this reality, in this, facts do not penetrate. Facts are not presented, and the only narrative is, well, if you're not one of us, if you're not a Republican, you're not a part of my tribe, you're not only evil, but you're also satanic, mentally ill. That's a favorite of mine. Nice little casual ableism there. You're a terrorist. You're somebody who hates America. You want to destroy America. You're one of the worst people. And so that's the problem here. Now, what they do is they exploit white male grievance politics and culture wars. And so what they do is that they work people into a consistent frothy rage where they're angry because they always feel like they're under attack. And of course, it's reinforced every day by Fox News, the host telling you that you are under attack. Now, what's interesting about this study, and I think that context is really important here, when people are removed from watching Fox News, they actually end up becoming more aware and more reasonable. Now, that's fascinating. Very, very interesting. Now, what they found is that actually the viewers became more skeptical of the news that they hear and less likely to buy into fake news. And that process begins as early as 3 days. Wow. Now, the findings of the study, and it's a pretty long study, written by David E. Brockman and Joshua Alcala, explained that the experiment used content analysis that compared the two networks during the time of September 2020, during the height of the pandemic. And so, obviously, there were some pretty major things going on. During the period, the researchers explained, CNN provided extensive coverage of COVID-19, which included information about the severity of the COVID-19 crisis and the poor aspects of Trump's performance handling COVID-19. And I think we can all agree he did not handle COVID-19 very well. I mean, telling people, why don't we shine a light into the people's bodies or inject disinfectant? That's ridiculous. Ridiculous. And dangerous, by the way. Very, very dangerous. Now, Fox News, what they decided to cover was something else other than COVID-19. The coverage of COVID-19 that Fox News did offer actually provided little of the information that CNN did, instead giving viewers information about why the COVID virus was not serious and not a serious threat. So what did they do instead? What was a serious threat? Fox News extensively but highly covered racial, I'm sorry, let me start that again. On the other hand, Fox News extensively but highly selectively covered racial issues, and its coverage of these issues provided extensive information about Biden and other Democrats' supposed positions on them, many of them who, of course, those positions they did not share. Let me give you an example, right? So, look, a lot of the Fox News coverage is that Biden hates the police. Biden wants to defund the police. Every Democrat politician wants to defund the police. And that's the mainline position of the Democratic Party. Now, that's not true. Why? And why do I say that, right? It's because I'm in favor of defunding the police, and the Democratic Party is not. Absolutely not. Joe Biden gave more money to the police. And look, by the way, a lot of the Democrats don't agree with defund the police. Democratic voters, especially black voters, who overwhelmingly, according to polls, are against defunding the police. And so Fox News, however, will take the narrative and say, oh, Biden, he wants to defund the police. Look, he's trying to defund the police. Look at these Democrats, they're trying to defund the police. No, that's just simply not true. Simply not true. There's a couple progressive Democrats that have said defund the police. And so, all right. Now, let's go back to that. Now, Fox News also covered outbreaks of violence at protests, which, yes, absolutely happened. Now, was it a majority of the protests? No, it was 93% peaceful. And when there was violence, there's definitely some cases where the police had escalated and started violence in that in some of those protests, many of those protests. And so there's that. Now, there's more. They also, before I go to that, the issue of vote by mail, CNN also provided little information about either violence or protests or racial justice for American cities. And so there's that. Now, the networks also both covered the issue of vote by mail, but again, dramatically different information about it, in addition to offering different framing of the issue. And I think framing is really important. So now the researchers noticed that difference in framing and the coverage, and they called it partisan coverage filtering, which is, I guess, pretty simple, pretty self-explanatory, right? They find what fits their narrative, what fits their worldview, and they cover that, and they don't cover other things that do not fit their narrative or their worldview. Now, the study also found both large decreases in knowledge of information covered on Fox News during the incentivized period and large increases in knowledge of information CNN covered during this period, indicating that both substitution away from Fox News and substitution toward CNN occurred and impacted viewers' beliefs. Now, I think that is also very, very relevant here. Now, the study also found more substantial evidence for agenda setting, as treated participants were much more likely to see issues covered on CNN, COVID-19, instead of on Fox News, racial protests, as important. So basically, what's going on is Fox News sets their agenda by saying, let's focus on race and racial protests. Let's not talk about COVID, because COVID makes Trump look bad. He's downplaying COVID. It looks bad. And so we're just not going to talk about it. And when we do, we're going to downplay it and leave out things that might make our party look bad. Now, CNN also, CNN generally is not in favor of some of these social justice movements. For example, the calls to defund police, again, along with mainstream Democrats. And so you also had COVID-19, which was a really, really important situation where thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people died as a result of this. And so that's agenda setting. Now, the viewers, look, the viewers of Fox News, during that time period, a lot of what they talked about is, oh, did you see that Portland burnt down? You see all the American cities that have been burnt to the ground by Antifa, by BLM? You see what's happening? At the same time, people who don't watch that media, who watch, maybe CNN, MSNBC, or neither, and just read like straight news from other places, are like, look, hundreds of thousands of people died. Americans have died from COVID-19. Why would you not take this seriously? Well, how many people died at these social justice protests? Not very many. Hundreds of thousands of people have died from COVID-19. Why are you paying attention to that? Why are you not taking them seriously? And we now know the answer, of course. It's because of their media. And their media is agenda-driven from the top. They are the propaganda arm of the Republican Party. That's what they were created for. That was the whole purpose of Fox News. They were created specifically to give conservatives, to give Republicans a Republican Party outlet. That's it. They weren't created as a way to do news. They were there specifically to do propaganda. And I think that's really important. That's really important. Now, there's more. The study found something really interesting as well. And it says this in the next paragraph. It's far from obvious, they surmise, that viewing different networks would affect the beliefs and attitudes of the viewer. In fact, it wasn't so much that viewers were tuning in because they already felt that way. Their attitudes were actually being formed from the Fox network itself. Now, this is a situation that we've talked about, but was never really studied until now. And it's basically the Fox effect. I've heard a lot of stories. And I know, anecdotal, right? Take that for what it is. And seen a lot of reports where you had people that are like, yeah, my dad or my grandpa or my mom, they started watching Fox News and they have changed. They have changed since watching it. They have become more hateful. They have become more angry. They have become more conspiratorial. This is actual evidence of that phenomenon happening. That's what's happening. Now, there's also evidence of how to get people out of it. And before I get into that, I just want to know that the study says that they're not casual viewers. They're not people who like tune in or, might see Fox News at the gym. Okay? No, these are hardcore conservatives, conservative Republicans, who watch a lot of Fox News. The Fox viewers were nearly all very conservative and strong Republicans. Of 763 qualifying participants, we then randomized 40% to the treatment group to change the slant of their media diet. We offer treatment group participants, and here's some irony, right? $15 an hour to watch 7 hours of CNN per week. So, if you do it every day, it's an hour a day. $15 an hour. Again, super ironic. Now, that was during September 2020, prioritizing the hours at which participants indicated that they typically watched Fox News. So it's a complete replacement. Consistent with theories of selective exposure, the participants in our study, regular Fox viewers at baseline, were overwhelmingly strongly conservative and politically engaged. Yet, we still found that these highly engaged partisans could be persuaded by viewing opposition partisan media instead of their own. Now, the viewers also evolved to believe that if Donald Trump had made a mistake, Fox News would not cover it, saying, basically proving that Fox News engages in partisan coverage filtering. That's incredible. So, one more piece of information, and that's, again, how dangerous Fox News is. They also conducted an online survey several weeks later that found that the impacts of this study of watching CNN receded as treated participants returned to their prior viewership habits. Our finding that participants' attitudes immediately shifted at first away from and then back towards their partisan side, along with changes in their viewership behavior, accord with Ladinlen's conclusion that stable elite communication flows in the media, rather than any inherent durability of public preferences, may explain why public opinion is so resistant to change. So, for a short time, watching other news instead of Fox News changed people's opinions and perceptions. And they started to believe things that they were watching. And then when they went back to Fox News, all of that's gone. Complete reversion. And they're back to being conspiratorial and believing whatever it is that, Laura Ingraham, Tucker Carlson, and those people are saying. And it's because it's the repetition. Understand that Fox News has a formula. They have a formula that they use to keep people angry and engaged. And that's how they keep them there. They get them riled up, they get them pissed off, and then they make them believe that this is the only place you will ever find the real truth is on Fox. Everyone else is lying to you. You can't believe them. The things that they say, they're just not true. They're just not true. And by the way, they hate the country and they hate you. It's all targeted. It's all propaganda, specifically done to reinforce a certain narrative and a certain perspective that certain people at the top want you to think. If you really want to break that, you've got to expose people to other media. They've got to start watching other things. The people who watch Fox News as their sole news source. And here's the thing. I don't think anybody should have a sole news source. I don't think that, anybody should only pay attention to one type of news, one place to get their news. I believe in gathering news from different sources, different places, because every place, you have to understand, every place has a bias. I have a progressive bias, but I'm very open and honest with that. Yes, I have a progressive perspective. Now, does that mean that I'm going to color and change my reporting to fit my perspective? No, I'm going to give you the facts and then I'm going to offer my perspective. That's what we're supposed to do as news people, right? Or as people who discuss the news. Fox News doesn't do that because they're not in the news business. They're in the propaganda business. And so I think it's very important to differentiate between the two.